Hi everyone, I'm Shichana Datta and I'm a PhD student at School of Computer Science at University College Dublin. And I'm also associated with Insight Center for Data Analytics, Ireland. So I'm going to talk about our paper and analysis of variations in the effectiveness of query performance prediction on behalf of my co-authors, Debashish Ganguly from University of Glasgow, Mandar Mitra from Indian Statistical Institute, and Derek Green from University College Dublin. So, what is this query performance prediction? I would like to quote from the paper published in 2010, where authors said that if we could determine in advance which retrieval approach would work well for a given query, then hopefully selecting the appropriate retrieval model on a per query basis could improve the retrieval effectiveness significantly. So, in other words, the objective of QPP is to predict how easy or difficult a given query is for an IR system. So now the question is, what do you mean by an easy or difficult query? Let's explain the situation like this. Assume that the user is given three different retrieval models, as you see here, and the user wants to know who would give more relevant documents for the input query. Let's say there are two queries, agoraphobia, and the other one is black bear attack. So since the first query is about a disease, we could assume that the relevant document set would be, quite distinct, or we could say separable from the whole collection. On the other hand, the black bear attack is more of a subtle query. That is, there could be plenty of context which might not satisfy user-specific information, etc. So in that case, the user might want to reformulate the input query to experience a better outcome. So there should be a way to measure this query specificity, and this is where QPP estimators comes into play. So it gives us an estimate like how easy or difficult the input query is, and based on that, it helps users identify if they need to reformulate the query or not. So there are two types of QPP estimators that we use. First is pre-retrieval estimators, where you have the queries and then you predict the performance of each query based on the content and the context of the query. Predictors are often derived from linguistic or statistical information in this case. And then finally, you rank the queries based on the predicted estimation. Average IDF, max IDF, these are this kind of pre-retrieval estimators. On the other hand, in case of post-retrieval estimators, you have a list of queries and then you retrieve a list of documents in response to these queries. And then you estimate the query performance by analyzing the result list returned by the retrieval engine. And finally, we rank the queries accordingly. Clarity, WIG, NQC, these are such post-retrieval estimators. So how do we evaluate these QPP estimators? So given a query and a retrieval system, we first get a list of top score documents, and based on certain IR evaluation metrics such as AP, NDCG, or recall, we measure the specificity of each of the input query from this list. So the higher the value, the more specific the query is with respect to the collection. And we consider these values as the ground truths. Now, for the same list of queries, we predict the specificity of each of the queries using any of the QPP estimators that are available and get a predicted list of top scores. Finally, we measure the correlation between these two lists to estimate the effectiveness of that particular QPP estimator that we are examining. Okay, so basically you see that there are too many possible combinations, right, through which we can make this prediction. Like we have three different retrieval models, LMJM, LMTDISH, PM25. You have four different IR evaluation metrics, and on top of that, you can set different cutoffs like 10, 100,000, so on and forth. And there finally there are a number of choices for QPP estimator. So this is pretty confusing. Like what would be the best combination to get the best QPP predicted scores? So in this paper, we investigate that what happens if we vary this IR metric or the IR model or the rank cutoff used to construct the QPP evaluation ground truth? Does it actually lead to significant differences in outcomes of a QPP method? So to answer this question, we analyze the sensitivity of QPP results with variations in the IR evaluation metric, which is theta you see here, and the IR models, which are S, for the different QPP methods like average IDF, NQC, WIG, and UFWIG that you see here. The metrics that we used were AP, NDCG, recall, and P, and they are all measured on the top 100 retrieved documents using 3 different retrieval models that you see here. And we measured the standard deviation across the metrics and across the IR models as well. So these red cells are actually indicating the lowest standard deviations, and the green cells are the highest scores. So all the experiments that we have done for this paper are on Trek robust dataset. So what we observe from these tables, we made a number of observations in relation to varying IR evaluation metrics and also the IR models. So firstly, we see that the variations in the IR evaluation metric, that is theta, mentioned over here, while keeping the other two components fixed, like retrieval models and the rank cutoffs that I'm talking about. This gives us considerable absolute differences in the values. For example, compare the QPP evaluation of this value, like 0.5006 for BM25 for AP, and you notice this value 0.2525 for PAC10, and the retrieval IR model is BM25, the difference is quite high, which shows that these absolute differences can be quite high. Our next observation tells us that the variations in general are lower when correlation is measured with Kendall's tau. If you look at the table, this is this is quite likely because the Kendall's tau is measured in a pairwise manner that we all know, and so it depends only on the agreements between the true and the predicted order between a query pair, and not on the absolute values of the predicted scores as we compute for Pearson's R or Spearman's correlation. And also, we observe that LMGM in most cases shows low variances in QPP estimation. Well, for now we'll see how the variations due to IR models affect QPP estimation. First, similar to the case for IR metric variations, it is again observed that mostly measuring QPP outcomes with Kendall's tau results in the lowest variances in QPP results. And secondly, we observe that compared to variations across IR evaluation metrics, we observe that the variations occurring across IR models is lower compared to compare the bold-faced green, that is sigma S values, with those of the sigma theta values. So this tells us that experiments need to put more emphasis on a precise description of the IR metrics used for QPP evaluation. And lastly, we see that while WIG and UFWIG show lowest variances for a precision-oriented evaluation of ground truth retrieval effectiveness, for example, average IDF and NQC methods, the least variations are used for recall. So there is a lack of consistency on which combination of QPP method with IR evaluation context give us the least variance. Well, next we dive into the second research question, which is, do these variations actually lead to significant differences in the relative ranks of different QPP methods? So here in this table, the numbers that you see here, we have taken 3 different retrieval models, IR models. There are different metrics that you see here, AP, recall, and NDCG at different cutoffs. So consider this number, how we have got this number actually. So, for example, you have 7 different QPP systems, like as we have mentioned here, average, IDF, clarity, WIG, NQC, so on and forth. So you have total 7 different QPP systems. Now for the retrieval model LMJM, and for you consider the ground truth at AP at 100, you rank the QPP systems accordingly based on the predicted value, based on the correlation value that you get, and you measure the correlation using Pearson's R. And again, you rank all those QPP estimators based on the metric AP at 10. Again, you measure the correlation based on the Pearson's R. And finally, you measure the correlation between these two ranked list of QPP estimators using Kendall's tau. This is how we got this number. This is basically the Kendall's tau value that I'm talking about. So thus we have generated this table, and the lowest correlation values for each group is marked in red that you see in this table, and the lowest correlation overall are bold-faced. So now we investigate. So now we have observed few things, and we also observe the what happens if we vary due to the variations of IR evaluation metrics, and also for the IR models. So the first thing that we observed is LMGM leads to the most instability in the relative QPP system ranks. And this behavior most likely explains that this model has a tendency to favor shorter documents in the top metric in contrast to like LMD Dirichlet or BM25. Pardon. And secondly, we see that some evaluation metrics are more sensitive to rank cutoff values. For instance, the QPP ground truth measured with, say, recall at 10, it gives considerably different results when the ground truth corresponds to recall at 1000. If you look at the table, we have seen a lot of variations, while changing these values, these cutoff values. And lastly, we see that relative ranks of QPP systems are more stable with Kendall's tau that we have already observed for while computing the standard deviations. And in here, what is the difference between the previous table and this table? I have already explained that how we have got this number. We have actually computed the correlation between the ranked list of QPP systems, the 7 QPP systems using Kendall's tau. So instead of using Kendall's tau, we have measured the rank correlation with Pearson's R, and we have observed a similar trend as we saw in the previous table. So uh, here, we have done just the opposite thing. Like in the previous tables, what we did for constant model, we varied the IR metrics. Now the metric will be constant, and we have varied the IR models with different parameters, as you see here. So again, let me explain you again. So you have 7 different QPP systems. You rank them based on the correlation, like for this metric, AP at 100, and the retrieval, IR model is LMGM at with lambda 0.6, and you again rank those the QPP estimators with this combination, like AP at 100 and LMGM with lambda 0.3. So you again measure the correlation between these two rank list of echo QPP estimators, and you get this value. This is the Kendall value that you see. And we have also made certain observations based on IR models and IR models. So the first observation is, similar to the previous observation, relative ranks of QPP systems are quite stable, you see, across IR models, because in previous tables, what we see, the values are quite small. Here, the values are quite larger, which emphasize the fact that the relative ranks are quite stable across IR models, unlike IR metrics. So the second observation is quite similar to the previous ones, like LMGM leads to more instability in the QPP outcomes. And finally, the relative ranks are as usual. Here also we have seen the relative ranks of QPP systems are more stable with Kendall's tau. And like in previous cases, here also we have just got all the numbers the way we have got in the previous table. The only difference is instead of Kendall star, we have measured this with Pearson's R. And in conclusion, we would like to say that we have shown via extensive experiments that QPP outcomes are indeed sensitive to the experimental configuration used. So as part of our analysis, we have found that certain factors such as variations in the IR effectiveness measures has a greater impact in terms of QPP outcomes than other factors such as variations in the choices of IR models. An important outcome arising from this study is that further research on QPP should place greater emphasis on a clear specification of the experimental setup to enable better reproducibility. Thank you. Thanks for your patience.